Mr. Klugmann, thank you for agreeing on an interview with Tabula. Maybe we should start our conversation by first defining what does LEAP stand for and what is this new concept for the city.
Thank you. LEAP, L-E-A-P, refers to the four elements that in our model, LEAP City or LEAP Zone, make it an attractive place to invest and to live and to work, and will make it a place that is prosperous and that will grow through private investment and entrepreneurial activity. Legal, economic, administrative, and political factors. My model, I developed it in about the year 2000, and I showed it to people in Honduras and other countries, and they were excited, but they said it would be very difficult politically to do it at first. And then in 2009, someone who I've been working with many years became elected the president of Honduras. And he had the leadership to implement this reform. And there's a lot of excitement in Honduras about what this can be. And what it also means is the first one is the one that's difficult. Now they're talking in Guatemala. There was a conference discussing this. So the idea is to create a jurisdiction that's defined by a system of justice, the administration of justice, by economic policies, by an administration that is strong under rule of law, and a political model that gives stability and certainty, and the protection of rights. Now, when you put these together and it spells the word LEAP, what it also communicates is the economic development concept of leapfrogging. You can create a 21st century city. The nearest 21st century city in this part of the world would be Dubai. You can find a 21st century city. In Europe, there is no 21st century city. So the chance to leapfrog over the level of development of other urban areas that have to manage historic problems. For example, you have old cities were designed without the existence of cars. You have beautiful buildings, but they were designed in some cases without the existence of electricity. So that had to be added on later. You had to create a mechanism for cars to go on streets that were originally designed for a different purpose. So by using the LEAP City model, your economic development goes faster. You create something that's modern and attractive, and you accomplish what could be considered a great leap forward. A country like Georgia has put enormous attention on the factor of the economic model, and that's why Georgia is achieving success. If in Lazika you incorporate elements of a special jurisdiction, it won't depend on creating additional unique economic characteristics so much, because the reality is the economic model of Georgia is very attractive. It would mean adding on a legal arrangement that says to a foreign investor, you and everyone else can come here to invest, and we will outsource the administration of justice to a credible external source. And their mechanism where this can take place under British law and British courts, which is the best in the world. Dubai did that. They wanted to create an international financial center. But people said, wait a minute. Financial transactions are very large and there's a lot of money at risk. What if you put in your money and there's a disagreement, and the one you're in a disagreement with is the Emir of Dubai? Are you on an equal level with him? No, you're not. Or what if you're in a conflict in a courtroom and there's a powerful local economic group that's opposite you, the most powerful bank in the country? Are you on an equal basis in that courtroom? Maybe not. Or what if you're in a courtroom and opposite you is a group that has a lot of political influence? Maybe it's a protected minority, maybe it's a strong labor union, maybe it's someone who gives donations to the party in power. So an investor is thinking, how do I know that I'm going to be treated fairly? And the answer is, okay, what if in Dubai we say what we're going to do is create a new court, and we're going to hire as our Supreme Court gentlemen who have been judges in London and in Hong Kong, and for 30 years in their career have gained prestige because of their intelligence and their honesty and their integrity and their seriousness and the way they have conducted themselves both inside and outside the courtroom in hundreds of cases over decades. That will give credibility. And what if we give these gentlemen an independence in that judiciary so that even the emir cannot influence what they do? Will that make you more confident to invest? Will that increase your certainty? Yes. Will that lower your risk? Yes. So by doing these mechanisms, you make a jurisdiction more credible. Dubai says, we will give you British law, because they want to have something that is familiar and convenient and efficient to attract outsiders. That's why. That's why I don't talk about creating a special economic zone. I talk about creating a leap zone or a leap city. Because if you just focus on, look at, you have areas in Georgia today with zero tax. The reality is there are many places in the world where you can invest at zero tax. But the total amount of world investment that goes into the areas that are at zero tax is rather small. Where the capital and the investment actually goes is places that have a very strong and transparent administration of justice, efficient government, and political stability. So that's where most investment will go, and that within that reality, they go to the place with the lowest taxes. But if you don't have transparency in the judicial system, if you don't have a good public administration, and you don't have political stability, you're not competitive in terms of attracting high levels of long-term investment.
From those four components that you just listed, in order for the city to qualify as LEAP zone, which ones do you think are present and which ones need to be outsourced in case of?
I think the economic transformation of Georgia, which has given it such success and recognition by the World Bank, by the Index of Economic Freedom, by the competitiveness indicators, by so many different measures, are very strong. And I think maybe any changes in them will provide a very small incremental benefit. I think you're fine with what you have. I don't think you need to change anything there for the new city. I think in the legal element, even though Georgia has made very important improvements and has a legal system that's better than what you find in many places in the world, the real issue is for an investor, is it familiar? Do they understand it? Do they have confidence in it? Do they need to start and learn it all over? And do they believe that if they were in a dispute with the government, that they would be on an equal basis inside that system? And the answer in every country is the same. The answer in every country, and I mean every country, when really large contracts are done with a major corporation, the contract always establishes that the jurisdiction will not be in the national courts. Everyone of any size does that. The problem is what happens to those that are not huge? What happens to those who are medium-sized? What happens to those who are not foreign, to those who are national? By creating the outsourcing model, everyone gets treated equally. No one has an advantage. Because even think of two Georgians. Suppose there's one Georgian who is very powerful, very wealthy, very politically influential, very prominent. And then there's another Georgian who is a common person. To have an external access to justice, from the point of view of this foreign judge, they're the same. They don't see any difference. Whereas inside Georgia, maybe they would see a difference, right?
If Lazika is built, who will be its main competitor country?
As a 21st century city. Well, the competitor there, Dubai, is a 21st century city, but for many people it's a difficult climate. It's outside of European culture. there is the opportunity to be the first and strongest opportunity for people who want to have a 21st century city as their venue with good access to Europe. It's also a strategic location through Georgia, Azerbaijan, the Caspian Sea, the landlocked zones of Central Asia. It can be the point of contact between all of Central Asia through into the Mediterranean. So it's a strategic, economically strategic point if it's created as a venue for international commerce. That's what the opportunity represents. Because you're starting and there's nothing there, the urgent requirement of those who are developing this area is to show transparency, to produce credibility, or no one will come. Or no one will come.
So who is going to build this new city, for example, in case of Lazika?
I think it really has to fundamentally be private investment. Because, you know, Lazika can either provide an additional economic motor for the national economy of Georgia, or it can provide additional baggage and weight and burden. If it's understood as a cost and an investment burden for the national government, that's not a motor, that's just more weight to carry. That's more of a burden on the limited resources of the state. On the other hand, if it's built through private investment, that creates a new motor of economic development. And I think that's the model that works. That's the model that is attractive. You know, it was very interesting. I had an interview with a correspondent from the New York Times a couple of days ago. And she was talking about, you know, build a new city, build a new city, build a new city. And I was answering her questions, but I realized there was something I didn't understand about why she was asking these questions. And then finally I said, wait a minute, let's pause for a moment. It's like, for me, I said to her, a light just went off. I think I understand what you're thinking. When you say build a new city, you think of a construction project. You're thinking about concrete and steel. I said, that's a legitimate way, and I respect people who will think that way, but there's a different way of thinking of a new city. And that's to think of it as a jurisdiction that is understood under a regime of law, economics, administration, and politics that creates safety, transparency, rule of law, opportunity, that is a magnet and a beacon. Ronald Reagan, in his last speech as president, used as a figure of speech, he spoke of for many years of that America as a shining city on a hill. When he talked about a city, it wasn't that it was about concrete and steel. It was a place that was a magnet, that was a beacon, that represented values, that attracted people because of the ideas and the institutions that existed there. If the ideas are strong and the institutions are trustworthy, the people who come are the people who build the city. If you don't have that, then you need to do Brasilia or Astana, where the government builds the city, because you haven't got the values and the institutions to attract people who want to contribute and build. When you go to a city and you say, this is an exciting city, what it means is it was built by the people. It was able to attract people who want to create things. So it's alive.
Will it have the potential to be self-financing?
In order for it to be self-financing, what you need to understand is the difference in value of undeveloped, empty land and the value of urban real estate. The most valuable land in the world is in the center of cities. Because the development of the new city begins with land of very low value, because there isn't anything there, and through urbanization becomes a very high valuable, the rate of return on investment is extremely high. The only thing you have to provide is long-term stability and confidence and transparency. Because if I say to you, you will have an extraordinary rate of return, it takes place over a period of 20 or 30 years, you'll say, okay, I'll do that, but you need to show me that there's a legal, economic, administrative, and political framework that permits me to have confidence for 20 or 30 years. You need to give me certainty that's high and risk that's low. I'm willing to assume the risk, but you need to show that you're doing what makes that risk manageably low.
And half of population of Georgia now live in villages, and sooner or later they will be moving to the cities. What are some of the main problems that the government of Georgia will be facing?
That's a good question, but what's also a good question are what are some of the main opportunities and benefits the government of Georgia will be facing? Because it's both true, you know. The numbers that were given by, I think it was a World Bank report, is that the countries that achieve $10,000 per year in per capita income are also countries that have 65% urbanization rate. Today, Georgia is about 50%, right? About half the country is urban. So together with a process of economic growth and increasing incomes for people, there's also a process of urbanization. Now here's where we get to your question, problems. That's a problem if the migration of people is all into this city, because you create issues of a disproportionate development. You see countries where all the development is concentrated in one major capital city, and it creates some things that are dysfunctional. Now, what was explained to us, which was relevant for the specific case of Georgia, is the Soviet model created artificial pressures and incentives for the overdevelopment in size of Tbilisi and the underdevelopment of a second, third, and fourth city. It was explained that under the Soviet regime, in order to have an opera house, an underground subway, a stadium of 50,000, even for the quality of the vehicles that the governing authorities would be allowed to use for themselves, it was extremely important, in fact it was necessary to have more than 1 million in population. There's a normal distribution of the relative size of cities. That is, if you look around the world, the mathematical relationship between the size of the largest city and the second largest city and the third largest city and the fourth largest city, there's a normal relationship among these, but not in Georgia. In Georgia, it's as if the second largest city has had its population and development consumed by Tbilisi.
Could it have any impact on solving problems with aphasia and reintegrating?
I think the long-term effects can be very positive in a lot of ways. There are realities which you see around the world. I mean, look at the impact that small enclaves have on their neighbors. I think in the same way that Hong Kong had an influence on all of China. Because the truth is that if you think of a leap city concept, the best example of what can happen would be what happened in China with the special economic zones, Shenzhen. Here you had the free market economy of Hong Kong, and it was next to all of China. And there was the fear, won't China crush Hong Kong? You have small, free Hong Kong. Is China going to crush it? But that's not what happened. What actually happened is Hong Kong, by its example, transformed China. Deng Xiaoping, the leader of China, over 30 years ago, saw Hong Kong and said, that works, and what we're doing doesn't work. So he took a small piece of land adjacent to Hong Kong called Shenzhen, where by Chinese standards, very few people lived. In fact, that population has grown from about 100,000 to over 10 million. So that means the people who were there chose to go there. They said, I want to be part of this. It became the fastest growing place in the world. And because it was successful, additional special economic zones were created across the entire coast of China, eventually over 20 different special economic zones, and then it expanded inland where every provincial capital became a special economic zone. That was the influence of Hong Kong. So I look at Lazika and I would ask a much larger question. Will this be an inspiration that could influence all of Russia? In the same way that Hong Kong was an inspiration that influenced all of China. I think it is just as likely that that will become the historic importance of Lazika.
Should there be any additional guarantees for investors to assure them on the first stage to invest near conflict zone? How will that work?
Redundancy is part of this design. So it means you have guarantees based on the Constitution, guarantees based on the law, guarantees based on an independent board of directors, guarantees based on independent judiciary, guarantees based on international treaties, guarantees based on contractual relationships with the national government of Georgia. The enemy of investment is the lack of certainty. Investors are even willing to accept risk if they know what the risk is. It's the uncertainty. If the investor wants to receive the benefits of his success, it's because he's willing to accept the price of his failure. But it's very different if the investor fails because he made a bad business, or if the investor has done nothing wrong, but the government confiscates his property, or a politically important group conducts a legal action to capture his assets and take it away from him, which happens in many countries in the world. That's the sort of risk that prevents investment from having confidence. What has to be thought about with a city is this is not understood as a construction project, though it will be. It's understood as the creation of an attractive jurisdiction. That works.
A few words about Ronald Reagan. Could you please remember some episode of your working with him?
I worked with President Reagan. I was one of his speechwriters, and I was involved in some other policy topics. One thing which I went to visit the statue to Ronald Reagan here in the city of Tbilisi, which I had wanted to go to before I came here. I think it's very beautiful. And I think it's an extraordinary statue. It's very different from many public monuments where an important leader will usually be showing his authority and his power, and more likely to be standing up or just a bust of his head. Instead, what you see there is the statue of a man of human size. He's sitting down, he's relaxed, and he's satisfied. And what I see in that statue is, well, he's saying, I like what I see when I look at Georgia. And I think Lazika is the new challenge and the new opportunity of creating the new city. And I think one of the most enthusiastic supporters for it would be President Reagan. When Reagan was president, every year he would sign a proclamation declaring Captive Nations Week. The captive nations, this were places like Georgia, or Ukraine, or the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, inside the Soviet Union, or Warsaw Pact states like Poland or Hungary, inside the Soviet bloc. And he said these are captive nations. And the sophisticated academic experts in the important universities said, oh, this is very bad that President Reagan is doing this because he's not being realistic. He's a man who's living in the past. Because, you know, Georgia, since 1921, has not been an independent state. This Ronald Reagan, there's something wrong with him because he's in the past. What they didn't understand was special about Ronald Reagan is he was living in the future. They were trapped by a very temporary reality. And what Ronald Reagan saw is that was not permanent, that the future was one where the captive nations would be free.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.